Hello everybody, Ben Austin here. We're going to be taking a look at Sergio Garcia hitting a driver, and one of the things that we want to do is to do a proper analysis. We want to make sure that we have a camera that is stationary. So one thing to do when you're at home to make sure that you have a stationary camera, if you're not completely sure, is draw a couple lines and some objects in the background, and we're going to just draw a couple lines here and toggle the camera back and forth to see if the lines move. And as you can see, the camera moves a little bit, so we won't be able to draw perfect lines, but we will still be able to draw some. But first thing we're going to do is look at Sergio's setup here, and this is pretty typical with what you'll find in a tour player. Ball position driver is, just inside the left heel, about right where the left armpit is. So pretty forward in the stance. For people that slice, might want to move the ball more forward, as one of the more common things you'll see when you're teaching golf, especially with higher handicappers, is people tend to put the ball too far back in their stance. So ball's pretty far forward. You can see that Sergio's left shoulder is higher than his right shoulder, and that's because his right hand is lower on the grip than his left. Again, something good to copy there. A lot of times we'll get people that have too level of shoulders, so you definitely want to get your left shoulder higher than your right. Alright, so let's take a look at Sergio's backswing here. So as we go back, I'm going to get to right about here and just take a look and see what's going on. So one good thing you can look for in your own swings is notice the space right here between his hands and his right leg. So the way that is created is by having width in your golf swing and by having the proper shoulder turn. Okay, so if you take a look at Sergio's shoulders here, you can see that his shoulders are probably about 30 degrees open or so at this point. So if you notice when you're swing, if you don't have that space, you might want to add a little bit of shoulder turn to your backswing. But as we keep going back, we get the left arm parallel. Got some good stuff here. So you can see, talking about width again, you can see how far Sergio's hands are from his chest. So the left arm is pretty straight. You can see he's got about 45 degrees of hinge here, which is kind of on the low side at this point. You'll notice some tour players have a little bit more. Somebody like a Steve Stricker will have a little bit less. But the thing that makes Sergio special is what we're going to see on the downswing, and I'm sure you've probably seen it before. But if you take a look at Sergio's shoulders here, his shoulder turn at this point, it's pretty close to 90. I mean, it's probably about 75, 80 degrees at this point. So he's got a lot of shoulder turn at this point, and his left arm's only parallel. So as we get Sergio to the top, which it's kind of hard with Sergio to figure out where the top stops because he has such a smooth transition, but we're going to say right about there is the top of Sergio's swing. So, one thing you can see in excuse me, in in Sergio's shoulders is the amount of shoulder turn he has. So he's looking at about 100 degrees of shoulder turn. His hips have turned roughly about 45 degrees. Okay. So, you'll hear a common thing in golf about the X factor, which is the difference between your shoulders and your hips. So, if Sergio's turned his hips 45 degrees and his shoulders have turned 100, the difference of that would be 55 degrees. So, the higher the number, the more difference, the more potential speed and energy you have created. Now, one odd thing about Sergio is if you take a look at Sergio's footwork, you can see how the inside of his right foot has come off the ground. Now that's very atypical with a tour player. Generally, you'll notice that most tour players, their weight will actually be on the inside of the right foot. The right foot doesn't actually come up like that. But part of that reason is, if we go back to the beginning, Sergio. Now we're gonna. Granted, this camera is not perfectly stationary, but just for today's sake, you can see how Sergio has a good amount of lower body slide in his backswing. That's not something that you'll generally see with tour players, but the reason he can do that is from what you're about to see. So remember when Sergio took his backswing, how he had about, let's say, 45 degrees of hinge here. I'm just going to mark where that's at. Well, when Sergio starts his downswing, let's look at what is moving first. So you can see the lower body is going forward as the hands are still going backwards. Now that is very hard to teach somebody, but again, going back to the X factor, right there, Sergio's hips are about 0 degrees and his shoulders are about 75 degrees close. So he's actually increased his X factor. But take a look at the amount of hinge that he has there. Now, 99.99% of the population on planet Earth cannot do this, but this is very good to copy. Notice how much hinge he has on his downswing. So he actually increases the amount of hinge on the way down by a tremendous amount. Most players will do the complete opposite of that. Most players, when they get to right there, and I'm just going to mark where this club is at. Most amateurs, especially people that can't break 90 and even can't break 80, to some extent, when they come down, that club actually has less hinge. So Sergio has more hinge. The average player will actually have less hinge than they did on their backswing. Okay, so it's kind of hard to draw with the lines, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying here. But holding that hinge, see, that's just incredible. I mean, that club almost hits him in the shoulder. Okay, that angle right there, and I'm sure if other people do this analysis, you're going to hear the same thing. That angle is how you create speed, how you store up energy, and how you compress the golf ball. Most players that, if you were to go out and video yourself right now, I can almost guarantee you will not have that amount of hinge on the downswing. Most players that can't break 80, can't break 90, especially can't break 100, will look more like this at that point. So there will be no hinge whatsoever. So that would be something very good for people that struggle with contact. If you tend to chunk them and top them, work on holding that hinge a little bit more on the downswing. And then as he comes into impact, just very, very good. And you'll hear tour players talk about how Sergio is one of the best ball strikers that is on tour. You can see, it's kind of blurry, but we can tell that club is leaning slightly forward. Okay. If we look at Sergio's hands, you can see that his left wrist is flat, and you can see that his right wrist is bent back right there. Okay. Take a look at his arms. Again, what you'll notice with very good ball strikers, left arm is straight. Okay, and the right arm is still slightly bent. Kind of a pitch right arm. almost like you're pitching a ball sidearm. And then once you let go of the ball, the arm will straighten. But, you know, one thing to take note is if we go all the way back to the beginning, I know we said we can't really trust the lines too much, but if I put a box around Sergio's head and we take it back to impact, you can see how his head goes back. So the reason his head goes back, you know, and if we go back to address and draw a line on his spine, something like that right there. There we go. So you can see that Sergio's head has gone back a little bit. He's increased the amount that his spine is tilted, and what that has done is that is allowing him to hit more up on the golf ball. So long drivers of the golf ball will have the club de-lofted at impact, which is where Sergio's hands are out in front. So the club will be de-lofted but swinging up, and that is how you get high launch and low spin, and that's, you know, basically how these guys crush it. So we're just going to take a quick look at Sergio's follow through. You know, so pretty awesome there. And pretty good. So, you know, one thing that I look at this finish that kind of interests me here is this right toe. See how a little bit of, you can tell there's just a little bit of weight on that back foot. And, you know, if I drew a line up from inside of Sergio's left foot, you can see how a majority of his body is behind that line. So he's got a little bit of weight hanging back there. But, I mean, a lot of good stuff in this golf swing to copy. Hope you enjoyed the analysis. Hopefully there'll be plenty more to come. And, you know, if we can get you to look like that when you hit the golf ball, good things are going to happen. But you can visit benaustingolf.com or swingreader.com for more information. Have a great day.